The Bible says there's a kind of invisible fence that protects our home and our life from evil. However, in Job's story, this protection was deliberately turned off. That's how the most protected man on earth became the target of a dangerous bet made in heaven. Between God and the devil himself, I'm going to show you what really happened to Job. In this documentary about his complete story, with information never revealed before. Picture a man sitting on a pile of ashes outside the city walls. His skin is a living crust of inflamed sores, covering from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. He uses a piece of broken pottery, a sharp shard he found in the garbage, to scrape his own flesh, in a brutal attempt to relieve the itching that burns his bones. The smell of infection is so strong that anyone passing by needs to cover their face. But just one day earlier, this unrecognizable being wasn't in the trash. He was at the top of the food chain of the ancient East. We're talking about Job. At that moment, he wasn't just a religious man. He was an economic powerhouse, owner of 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels. In an era where currency wasn't metal, but life, he controlled enough resources to feed entire cities. Usually, powerful men fall because they make serious mistakes. They're cruel or arrogant. But Job's story defies all our logic of justice. He didn't become a target because he did something wrong. He became the perfect prey precisely because he did everything right. The ancient text says he was upright and turned away from evil. He lived in a state of alert, offering preventive sacrifices for his children, fearing they might have sinned even in thought. Job knew the world was dangerous and believed his integrity built an invisible wall around his house, a fence of divine protection that kept evil from entering. What he didn't imagine is that this very perfection shone so brightly in the spiritual darkness of that era that it ended up attracting the attention of something that doesn't live on earth. The integrity that should be his shield ended up painting a target on his back. While he prayed, his name was being summoned in a place where mercy doesn't enter. The nightmare was set, but the trigger was pulled far from there, at a meeting to which no human was invited. While Job offered his sacrifices on earth, a much more dangerous meeting was happening in heaven. The biblical account describes an assembly of spiritual beings before God, and in the midst of them, an intruder arrives. The text is direct. The devil was there. He's not presented with horns or a pitchfork, but as a real and intelligent presence who had just arrived from a patrol. When God asks where he comes from, the answer is from someone who knows every corner of the human world. From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it, God points to Job as an example of conduct. But the devil isn't impressed. He counters with a cynical and frighteningly logical argument. He looks at God and says, "Does Job fear you for nothing?" Here the devil reveals the real reason for his frustration. He claims there's a fence, a supernatural protection barrier that God placed around Job. The devil says, basically, "I tried to touch him, but I couldn't. You have protected his house and everything he has." The accusation is brutal. Job isn't faithful. He's self-interested. He only obeys because he's paid with protection. The devil's challenge is clear. Remove that fence. Let me touch what he has, and he'll curse you to your face. God accepts the challenge to prove that Job's faith isn't for sale. The order is given. Everything he has is in your hand. The only prohibition is to kill the man. At that moment, the invisible protection that shielded Job's farm disappeared. He felt nothing, heard nothing, but now he was completely exposed. The devil left that meeting with the permission he wanted, and he wasn't going to waste the chance. He already had a ready plan to destroy Job's empire in a matter of hours. The attack wasn't random. The devil chose the exact moment when Job's guard would be lowest. A feast day, when all his 10 children were gathered at the oldest brother's house. The biblical account describes a destruction operation in 4 stages, executed with military precision that left no room for reaction. The first blow came from the south. A messenger arrived reporting that the Sabians, a group of violent raiders from the region, had attacked the farmlands. They took the 1,000 oxen and 500 donkeys, killing all the servants working in the field. The agricultural base of Job's fortune was decimated in instants, but the crucial detail of the text is the simultaneity. The Bible repeats 3 times the phrase, "While he was still speaking, another came." There was no interval. While the first servant was still describing the massacre, the second arrived with news of a natural catastrophe. Fire of God fell from the sky, probably a devastating lightning storm, and incinerated the 7,000 sheep and the shepherds in the pastures. Job's financial capital turned to ashes. Immediately, the third messenger appeared. This time, the attack came from the north. The Chaldeans formed 3 war troops and surrounded the 3,000 camels, killing the guards. Without camels, Job lost his logistics and his trading capacity. In less than an hour, the greatest economy of the East was reduced to 0. But the devil's goal wasn't just bankruptcy. It was emotional collapse. The fourth messenger brought the final news. A violent wind coming from the desert struck the house where the banquet was happening. The structure couldn't withstand it and collapsed on the guests. All 10 of Job's children died buried. The man who woke up as a prosperous patriarch would end the day without possessions and without heirs. Faced with total destruction, Job's reaction broke the devil's expectation. In that culture, tearing the robe and shaving the head were the maximum signs of mourning and despair. Job did this, but instead of cursing heaven, he prostrated himself in worship. His phrase became historic. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. The enemy had taken everything Job had, but failed to take who Job was. The devil had lost the first battle, but not the war. He realized that taking away money and family wasn't enough to break Job's integrity. To win the bet, he would need to be much crueler. The biblical account immediately takes us to a second audience in heaven. The enemy returns before God with no repentance, but with a new brutal thesis. A man can endure grief, but no one endures physical torture. The phrase the devil uses is skin for skin. It was a trading expression of the time. It meant that a man would surrender any external possession to save his own life. The bet goes up a level. God removes the last barrier of protection over Job's body, maintaining only the prohibition of taking his life. The goal now wasn't to impoverish Job, but to break his spirit through continuous physical pain. The text describes that Job was struck with malignant ulcers, from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. It wasn't a common disease. It was a condition of total torture. He was forced to leave his house and sit in the ashes, probably at the garbage dump outside the city, where the outcasts stayed. Social humiliation now added to physical agony. He used a piece of tile to scratch himself, indicating unbearable and constant skin irritation. But the heaviest blow didn't come from the disease. It came from the only person the devil left beside him. Job's wife, who had also lost the 10 children and financial security, breaks under the pressure. She looks at her husband's miserable state and offers the only way out that seemed logical to her: suicide by blasphemy. She says, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." It's crucial to understand the context here. She wasn't necessarily being cruel. She wanted an end to his suffering. In her mind, God had become a torturer, and death would be a relief. But Job refuses the proposal. He responds like someone who understands divine sovereignty above personal comfort. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Job was now isolated, sick, bankrupt, without children. and misunderstood by his own wife. He had resisted the financial attack and the physical attack, but the final test would be intellectual and theological. Three figures appeared on the horizon. They were Job's friends, kings or wise men of the East, who came to comfort him. But what they brought in their baggage wasn't comfort. It was a judgment that would hurt more than the wounds on his skin. Three figures emerged on the horizon, walking toward the garbage dump where Job was isolated. They were Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. The text doesn't describe them as common neighbors, but as men of influence, possibly tribal leaders or wise men of their regions, who arranged a meeting to offer solidarity. They traveled miles expecting to find a sick friend, but what they saw defied their understanding. The biblical account brings a disturbing detail about this encounter. They lifted their eyes from afar and did not recognize him. The disease and physical torture had deformed Job's face so much that his closest friends looked at him and saw a stranger. The shock was so violent that these men, accustomed to controlling emotions, cried out loud, tore their robes and threw dust over their own heads. They came prepared to offer advice and words of wisdom, but the destruction before them was so absolute that words lost their meaning. Then, something rare in ancient history happened. The three sat on the ground with Job and stayed there for 7 days and 7 nights, without saying a single word. The text explains that they saw his pain was too great. In that culture, silence was the only respectful response in the face of a catastrophe of this magnitude. For an entire week, the only sound heard in that place was the wind and the difficult breathing of a man in agony. If you believe that true friendship is proven in the worst moments, comment now. Real friend stays. For 7 days, Job had only their presence, and, ironically, this was the only moment when his friends got it right. While they were silent, they offered comfort. The problem started when the silence ended. The psychological pressure of those days finally broke the dam. Job opened his mouth. The devil expected him to curse God, fulfilling the bet. But Job didn't do that. Instead, he cursed the day of his own birth. In chapter 3, he launches a cry of anguish, wishing he had never existed, asking that darkness had swallowed the date of his conception. He didn't attack the Creator, but rejected life itself. Job vented his misery, expecting compassion. But what he didn't know is that his friends, during that 7-day silence, weren't just suffering with him. They were judging. In their minds, a tragedy of that size couldn't be an accident. It had to be punishment. And now that Job had stopped talking, they were ready to start the trial. The 7-day silence was broken, but not with an embrace of consolation. What should have been a support session turned into a criminal interrogation. Eliphaz, the oldest of the group, takes the floor first. He doesn't shout. He uses cold and relentless logic to destroy Job's defense. His premise is simple and devastating. Who, being innocent, has ever perished? Think about the brutality of that question. Eliphaz is looking at a man covered in ulcers and saying, in other words, Job, the universe is fair. God is fair. If you're being destroyed like this, the fault isn't in the system, it's yours. In these men's minds, the world functioned like a perfect mathematical equation. If you do good, you receive good. If you receive evil, it's because you did evil. They couldn't conceive a universe where suffering was random or, worse, undeserved. But we, who saw the scene in heaven, know something they ignore. We know Job is innocent, and it's this privileged information that makes the reading so agonizing. We're watching 3 wise men psychologically torture a righteous man using religious arguments. The situation worsens when Bildad enters the conversation. He doesn't have Eliphaz's diplomacy. He goes straight for the open wound. He suggests that Job's 10 children died because they sinned. Imagine hearing that days after burial.